You probably want to know why the cemetery's here. London, back in the mid 18th century, was vastly growing in population, and unfortunately in 1848-49 they had some more serious cholera outbreaks, so that meant a lot more dead bodies. And essentially Mr. Richard Brown and Sir Richard Spry came up with a plan of creating a cemetery large enough to bury London's dead in almost perpetuity, but far enough away from London, but close enough so families could still visit their loved ones. Originally 450 to 500 acres were actually enclosed, and these are the acreage that we use today. The cemetery, the Necropolis Company as it was known then, took advantage of the rail line and created the funeral trains. They had a terminus in Waterloo, which then came down all the way to Brookwood. Originally there was no station at Brookwood, that came along a little bit later, but the train would go a little bit further on and then come off at a siding and then be shunted back into the cemetery. The railway line continued through what is known as North Cemetery today. It would cross Cemetery Pales, which is the road running between the two parts of the cemetery, into what is now known as South Cemetery. Each of those cemeteries had its own little internal station. So if a funeral was happening in the north side, the train would stop there first, unload its passengers and its coffins, then it would carry on to the south side where the same would happen. There was a set timetable, and at a certain time the train would then do the reverse, pick up its passengers from both little stations and then head back to London. Now, the rolling stock for the trains, the engines and the passenger carriages would have been standard rolling stock, although London South West Railways would hold back a couple of carriages just for funerals, because they felt that day trippers or ordinary passengers might feel a bit strange travelling, sitting in a seat that some mourners had been in previously. The coffins would be put in hearse carriages, and each of those carriages were segregated, first, second and third class. Each of those coffins would also have its own individual rail ticket, once again first, second and third class, but those tickets were one way, they were not return tickets. There are so many, but there is one lady that's outstanding for me, and her name is, and I hope I'm saying this correctly, Iqbal Hanazi Hussain. At the age of 15 she was married, she went on and had 7 children, but she was a lady that had a very good husband who encouraged her to get an education, which was unusual back then. She was born in 1897, I believe. And she learnt English through correspondence, sometimes with her husband. He would write letters home and she would reply. She went on to come to this country with one of her sons, who incidentally is also buried in this cemetery, as I've learned is her husband. And she went to university, and she fought for women's rights and to try and change the lifestyle of Indian women. And this she did by writing pamphlets and books. One book in particular, called Purdah and Polygamy, which I have recently read, is a very interesting insight into life of Indian women and marriage in those days. She set up girl guide groups back in India. She was also a teacher in India. She really worked hard for Indian women to have a bit more freedom and a bit more say about their lives.